In the 5th issue of the anthology title Marvel Spotlight, readers are introduced to a daredevil named Johnny Blaze. After finding out that his mentor and pseudo-father, Crash Simpson, had been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, Blaze made a deal with the demon Mephisto. Crash would be cured of his cancer in exchange for Johnny's soul. Mephisto, naturally being Marvel's analogous devil, used a loophole. Crash Simpson didn't die from his lung cancer. Instead, he was killed while performing a jump. It was then that Mephisto showed up and tried to claim Johnny's soul. I say tried to claim because it was at that point that Johnny's girlfriend and Crash's daughter, Roxanne, professed her love for Johnny. The purity of this act drove the demon back, but with his last bit of strength, Mephisto grafted a vengeance spirit named Zarathos to Johnny's soul. At that point, Mephisto would call upon Johnny Blaze to use Zarathos to punish evil whenever he felt its presence. Blaze would become the Ghost Rider. And for the record, yes, I am aware that Marvel Comics also had a Western character named the Ghost Rider. However, outside of the name, that character doesn't share any similarities with Johnny Blaze. In fact, when they actually started reprinting the adventures of the Western character, they changed his name to Phantom Rider to avoid confusion. Ghost Rider proved to be a fairly popular character, even going on to join a couple of super teams in the form of the Champions and the Legion of Monsters. After an encounter with a demon named Centurios, the spirit of Zarathos wound up being placed inside of a soul crystal. This would free Johnny Blaze of his burden, and the mantle of the Ghost Rider would pass on to Blaze's younger brother, Danny Ketch. Now, Danny Ketch is a character we're going to have to cover at a later point. And for all intents and purposes, Johnny Blaze's time as the Ghost Rider was over. Or was it? This is Ghost Rider, the Hammer Lane. Johnny Blaze slowly schlubs his way through the accounting job he's had for the last 3 years. After enduring the teasing of his fellow employees concerning his previous stunt-jumping career, Johnny steps out for some air. While standing in the company parking ramp, Johnny notices a motorcycle and something begins to stir inside him. Suddenly, Johnny hops on the bike, and the Ghost Rider is reborn. Johnny comes to outside a small roadhouse with immediate feelings of regret. He goes inside and orders a beer. However, his attempted sorrow drowning is interrupted by a distraught young woman screaming about a hit-and-run homicide. Blaze becomes the Ghost Rider once more and goes after the killer, a semi-truck driver. The rider leaps onto the truck and rips the driver through the windshield, causing the truck to crash. With his dying breath, the teamster confesses to being forced into running meth for his boss. Blaze comes to again, this time in Maryland. He stops off to get his bike fueled and calls his girlfriend, who's extremely worried. Johnny Blaze's original girlfriend, later his wife, Roxanne, was killed along with the couple's children in the Danny Ketch Ghost Rider series by a villain named Hellgate. Blaze hops back on the bike and becomes the rider again as he goes after the trucking company owner. The owner gives the name of his meth manufacturers before the rider takes him out and destroys the company. Unfortunately, if any of you out there are picturing Johnny Blaze going up against Walter White of Breaking Bad, you might as well stop right now. That whole meth subplot kind of just stops right here. Blaze comes to the next day and immediately tracks down a priest for an exorcism. Unfortunately, he gets nowhere. Blaze then tracks down a biker thug named Gunmetal Gray. Blaze pays Gray to do 2 things: track down the Ghost Rider and kill him. After making a return appearance at a local pawn shop, the Ghost Rider heads out on the road where Gunmetal Gray is waiting. Gray isn't too much of a threat to the Rider, though, and he is easily fended off. Gray then sets for another plan by calling in a favor. Later, the Rider pops up at a local diner where Gray returns and crashes a truck into the building. Ghost Rider reverts to Johnny Blaze, who realizes that he may have made a mistake and tries to call Gray off. But Gray is having none of it. He turns his gun onto Johnny. It turns out that Gray saw Johnny transform, and so he's living up to his deal by killing Johnny in order to kill the Rider. Inside Johnny's mind, Blaze begins pleading with Zarathos to help him, but the demon isn't listening. Okay, I should point out right here, to the best of my research, Johnny Blaze and Zarathos rarely engage in Yu-Gi-Oh!-esque inner monologue conversations. Johnny is saved when another biker intervenes and allows Johnny to get back on his bike as the 2 speed off. The kid introduces himself as Juno, and he's the son of the man who fueled Blaze's bike earlier. While Johnny recovers with Juno and his father, Gunmetal Gray begins perpetrating acts of violence in order to drive the Ghost Rider out. Eventually, it succeeds. As Johnny does his best to avoid Gray, he manages to get some assistance from a young woman named Piston. She and Johnny slowly begin bonding over a few beers until Johnny becomes the writer once again to fend off a lecherous bar patron. Afterwards, Johnny leaves upset once more. It's then that Gunmetal Gray pops back up again, and he and Johnny begin a chase that begins to burn up the remaining fuel in Johnny's bike. Johnny tries to break off a little bit of help at a roadside station. He begins begging the clerks for help when Magnus, one of Gray's gang, crashes into the store. He gets shot, Magnus, by one of the clerks. Gray then enters the store to find Magnus's dead body. Incensed, he draws his gun on Johnny Blaze, who begins begging for forgiveness. In Johnny's mind, Zarathos tells Johnny to forgive himself and admit the truth. Johnny finally confesses to being bored and actually missing being the Ghost Rider. Blaze turns back into the Ghost Rider once more. Gray chooses not to confront the Rider and instead challenges him to meet one last time in Sturgis, South Dakota.
Yeah, I'm having real problems trying to track down where exactly this comic is taking place. I mean, it starts out in Los Angeles, then it goes to Maryland, and now it's in, like, the Midwest, I think? I'm not entirely sure. Heck, there's even a scene where Gunmetal Gray is confronting Johnny Blaze in an alleyway, and then suddenly Johnny's in a hotel room and he gets confronted by Gunmetal Gray. It's a completely different scene, but it's literally on the next page than to the alleyway scene.
Johnny and Piston hook back up with Juno and his father, who are with their gang, and they all head to Sturgis, where Gunmetal Gray is waiting. Gray moves to take down the Ghost Rider, only to have several of the Rider's supporters jump him. Gray fights off the supporters, and the Rider depowers. Johnny apologizes to Gray, explaining this was all because he wasn't comfortable in his own skin. Gray, however, does not forgive Johnny for what happened to Magnus and still wants to fight. Johnny, not the Ghost Rider, knocks Gray out, and he leaves on his bike with Piston.
Johnny? Don't you have a girlfriend back in L.A.? Johnny? Johnny? Well, that brings to an end Ghost Rider, the Hammer Lane. Anyway, Johnny Blaze would remain the Ghost Rider until 2011, when the mantle was assumed by a woman named Alejandra, and then the mantle got taken over again in 2014 by a man named Robbie Reyes, who drives a car for some reason. I guess Marvel Comics doesn't understand what the term rider means.
Okay, yes, I do get that someone can ride in a car. However, to me that means more like, say, a passenger in a car, not the equivalent of someone, say, riding a motorcycle, which I equate more to, say, driving a car. So in other words, the Ghost Rider, if he's in a car, is a passenger. And at that point, doesn't he just lose a little bit of his badassery?
Anyways, how is Ghost Rider the Hammer Lane? Well, I will say this. After consecutive episodes of having to review 12-issue long story arcs, this was a breeze. However, it was a breeze because this thing is dull. This is painfully boring. I mean, nothing is built on in this comic. It's basically just a random series of events that just happen to involve Johnny Blaze, the Ghost Rider. And even then, there's no real connection. I mean, that meth storyline was kind of interesting, but it seems to get abandoned halfway through. Bringing on the goons with the possible hit on the Ghost Rider just doesn't make any sense. That and the artwork is terrible. I'm sorry, the Rider is just way too bulky. I much prefer my Ghost Rider to look like it was drawn by Mike Plug or Mark Texiera, where he's this kind of sleek and sort of menacing, ominous looking figure, and not a whatever the hell this is. And, man, this is tough, because I actually like the writer, Devin Grayson. Her run on Nightwing, well, for the most part of her run on Nightwing, it's what got me get back into comics. But this stinks. I have to give Ghost Rider the Hammer Lane an F. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.